Welcome to Horrid and Vicious, a weekly true crime podcast. My name is Coda,
And I'm Candy.
and this week we're talking about the disappearance and murder of James Bulger.
All right, so there are a couple trigger warnings for this crime. They're going to be pretty telling. It was really, really brutal. So it's really heartbreaking. The triggers before we get started are child death, torture, and mentions/potential child sex abuse.
Oh boy.
So it's
It's a rough one.
great. Yeah, it's a really rough one.
Okay.
So let's start off with talking a little bit about James. On March 16th in 1990 in Kirkby, England, Denise and Ralph Stephen Bulger welcomed their son James to the world. And Denise was known to be really protective of her baby boy because she lost a previous child during pregnancy. And she took James everywhere with her. So it was no surprise when she took him to a shopping center known as the Strand in Bootle, England with her on the afternoon of February 12th, 1993, barely a month before his third birthday. Like most toddlers, James would run around when he had the chance. So he was being really fussy, and she let go of his hand, set him down so that she could reach into her purse and pay at a butcher shop. And it only took a moment for him to be out of sight. She immediately started searching for him and alerted the mall security, but when they still couldn't locate him, the police were called. Denise told the police what he was wearing that day. He was wearing a blue coat with yellow lining, silver tracksuit bottoms, and white sneakers. That evening, the police and the security looked through hours of footage from the CCTV in the shopping center, and they were able to see James exiting the shop he was in with his mother. By the time she was out to search for him, though, he was on the top floor following two boys out of the center. The last footage of James shows one of the boys holding James' hand and the other one walking ahead of them as they all three leave the Strand at 3:42 p.m. The police searched nearby areas and asked the public for help on locating the two boys in the CCTV, which they thought were teenagers around like 14 years old, and they were trying to get those boys to come forward. And they tried desperately to find him and the boys from the footage for the next 2 days, but none of the tips being called in are leading them anywhere at this point. After an eyewitness reports seeing James near the local Leeds and Liverpool canal, the police plan on dragging the canal the next day. However, on Sunday, 2 days later, February 14th, Valentine's Day, the hope of finding James alive is completely crushed when a group of children discover a body along train tracks that were only around 150 to 200 yards from the Walton Lane police station.
Oh, man.
James had sustained 42 injuries to his face, head, and body, and was undressed from the waist down, causing suspicion that the crime may have been sexually motivated. Sorry, I had to cough. Blue paint had been splashed over his face. James' murderers had laid his body across the train track in an attempt to make it look like an accident. His body had been severed by a train when it was found, and the pieces were separated because his lower half had moved further down the tracks due to the train. Originally, the group that discovered him had only seen part of his body, and they thought it was a cat because of the size before they got closer. There's also, there was mention of like maybe one of the train conductors might have also seen part of his body, and they thought it was a cat too until they saw the legs and called the police when they were able to. And then the culprits responsible for James' death were brought in on February 18th, 1993, after the police looked for a profile of the two boys that would have been skipping school in the area on Friday the 12th. And rather than finding what they thought would be at least teenagers, they found Robert Thompson and John Venables, both only 10 years old.
What?
A woman who knew the Venables had recognized John in slightly more enhanced images of the boys on TV and had seen them out during school hours on the 12th, leading her to report them to the police. Now, I should probably send you a picture from the CCTV footage,
10 years old.
Yeah, I mean,
Bro.
they're pretty short in this image that I saw, but it's also like, I'm surprised they could figure out,
Yeah.
based on this picture, who these kids were, because
When you said CCTV, I was like, what year did this
yeah,
happen again? Oh, wow.
it's
That's how they
93.
figured it out?
Well, that's how they first saw them, so they couldn't figure out who these
Oh,
kids were
yeah.
at first. And I think there's other angles of
He's so
them.
tiny.
So yeah, that's the picture of them from the CCTV when they were leaving. But there is other CCTV that shows John and Robert when because they were hanging out in the mall for a while.
That's so sad. He's so little.
I know, he was
Oh,
just under 3 years old, so he was a little
that
baby.
literally breaks my heart.
So
That's
I will say
so
like
sad.
90% of this he's referred to as the baby or baby James.
Good, because
he's
he
just a
is
baby.
literally a baby. That's so sad.
Yeah, so it's, I mean, absolutely shocking.
And the fact that it's 2 other children makes it even more sad.
Well, and it caused a lot of, like, controversy. A lot of people were like, they don't really understand, but then a lot of people were like, what they did was so completely cruel and evil. I haven't even explained to you how I go more in depth about what happened precisely to him.
Yeah.
But it's hard.
Because they're all kids, and it's always like
kids.
the cases with kids are the hardest ones because it's like part of you is like, well, they're just kids, but then the other part of you is like, well, sometimes there's a line.
Yeah. I would say
that you have
they
to draw.
were like at 10 years old, I can see like having more issues with it because 10 is so little still. And
right, like with a 17-year-old, it's like, but with a 10-year-old, it's like that's literally a child.
From the picture of them, I can see why they thought they were a little bit older because you don't see their faces. I will send you their what's the word, mugshots.
Yeah, mugshots.
Yeah. And it's like very obvious how little they are.
That's so sad.
They are just little kids.
It breaks my heart to see anything happen to kids, like at all, and the fact that kids sometimes are perpetrating these terrible things is even worse because it's like I have a hard time condemning them because they're little, but they have to be condemned because
what happens later on.
Yeah, well, that behavior is never acceptable. Like it's like, oh my god, they're babies. They're literally, oh my god, bro is 4'6". Oh,
yeah, they're literally just little kids.
They're just kids.
Like I was saying, if they were like older teenagers, I'd be more like, oh, they knew what they were doing more.
Right.
Like if they were like 16 or 17, I'm like, you're pretty close to being an adult at this point.
17-year-olds get tried as adults all the time, and I stand by that because you basically are an adult. Like, yes, your brain still has a lot of developing and maturing to do, but
your brain still has developing to do when you're 18. So
yes, that's what I mean. But
yeah,
you still know. You know not to murder somebody.
And I'm going to spoil something that I say a little bit later, but at least one of them did not have as good of a grasp of what death was, and another one did. So one of them didn't.
And kids do struggle because a lot of parents, I notice, don't like to explain death to their kids because it's a hard
subject.
It's a really hard subject to talk about, but you have to make sure that they understand,
Yeah. Well, here, just as an example, like one of my dad's friend's kids, I was like watching her for a little bit, and like a month or something before her grandma had died, or her grandpa or somebody, I don't remember exactly, but she asked me if we could go visit them in heaven, and I had to explain to her, like, heaven's not a place we can go.
Right.
Like, they are people that we will not see anymore in our lives, and it was really hard because I had to explain that to her because she was like, why can't we just go visit? Yeah, they all say that grandpa's in heaven now. Why can't we go see grandpa? And she was littler though. She's 10 now. And that was a couple of years ago. So she was a lot littler and she was asking me that.
Right.
I'm not sure what my concept of death was at 10 either,
I don't remember what my concept of anything was because most of my childhood's blacked out, but I'm pretty sure that I had been to funerals. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I have been to funerals like when I was younger. Honestly.
I bet these kids remember their childhood. Jeez.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy to
So,
think about. Like they're adult, like we're talking about their kids now, but they're
yeah.
adults now. Like this decision that they made at 10 years old altered the course of their life forever.
Yeah. I will say, like, we'll get into it a lot later, but there's like a lot that it's harder for them to figure out how to try them, and it's harder for them to give them
Yeah,
punishment and make sure that it's like fitting while also understanding like that these kids are kids sort of
they're
thing. So it's a
kids.
really hard situation. And the interviewing, honestly, I will say that part was probably a little easier because they were kids. It's like, yeah, they were lying and stuff, but
But they're
it
kids.
was it was pretty easy to tell
Yeah.
when they were
'Cause
trying to be
they're kids.
lying or manipulative because they were kids.
I do want to say props to the police for actually trying to find the little boy because in most of these cases that like at least I'm familiar with like cops from like the 70s, 80s, 90s, they really don't.
Yeah, I will say for one, it is in England. In the 90s there were cameras and stuff. And also he wasn't even 3, so they knew he didn't run away by himself. It was just like at first they thought he just walked off in the mall,
Which like
which
a
he
lot of kids
did.
do. Like my
But
mom
he
did that
didn't
all the
get
time.
that far. He
My
got
grandma had
lured away by the boys pretty quickly.
right.
And then
My
he was
mom
like he was out of there within a couple minutes.
and it's not hard because like I said, my mom wandered off all the time. My grandma actually had to get my mom a child leash because she wandered off so bad and it's like
Well,
it
and
was like the
originally they thought a
80s.
man
So
had taken the little boy, but then they kind of looked through that CCTV footage because people had been saying, "Oh, I think I saw like a man with a ponytail talking to some kids in the mall," and they thought that a man had abducted him after they like. So before they thought it was the boys, but after they realized that he was taken by somebody.
I
Sort of
see.
thing. So
I see.
yeah, then when they saw the CCTV, they figured out there were these kids who had gone with them. And I didn't put this in here because I'm not sure how true it is because I only saw it in one article. But there was one article that said that James'
Well, if you
dad
were
saw that they were with, or that he was with boys, like young boys. And he was like, I felt relieved because these kids were going to try to get him home, right? Sort of thing.
right.
But I only saw that in one thing, so I'm not sure if that's
You're not
true.
sure how true that. I mean, but that's the thing is, I can hear a parent saying that. You
Well,
know,
yeah,
like
because you'd think, oh, he's not with like an adult that's taking him and going to do something bad. You'd think, oh, he's with some
right.
kids
Kids are innocent
because
usually.
their kid was innocent. So
Right.
he was just a little
So
boy. He
little,
was just a baby.
literally so tiny. I cannot even get over. It breaks my heart.
Yeah. And then, I mean, so these other ones, they're kids too. Robert cried when he learned that he was a suspect after police showed up to search his home for evidence due to that tip from somebody who knew the Venables.
Yeah,
They
it looks like.
quickly found that he had shoes with blood on them,
Oh,
and the DNA testing, because it's in the 90s, thank God, not the 70s when they didn't really have that.
right.
So the DNA testing revealed that it matched James' blood. And when they showed up to John's home, his mother, Susan, said that she knew the police would come because of him skipping school. So she just was like, oh, they're here to get you because you're truant. I told him this would happen. And she mentioned offhandedly that he had come home that day with a coat full of paint. But she hadn't realized yet that he was a suspect for the murder of 2-year-old James.
Right.
Officers requested the coat, which had the same blue paint on it that was found on James' body. And it even appeared to have a tiny handprint on the sleeve.
No.
There were also markings on James' cheek, consistent with a shoe print from one of the boys. Only one article I read said that that was from Robert's shoe, but I'm not sure. And then they all mentioned the shoe print. Only one of them that I read mentioned that it was Robert's.
Specifically.
Yeah.
Specifically whose shoe. Okay. That's
When
so-
John realized that he was a suspect, he cried to his mother saying, I didn't kill the baby. And then he began blaming Robert immediately. And on the ride to the police station, he kept asking questions about Robert and if he had been arrested yet. And the boys were both scared but curious during the procedures at the police station. John was constantly asking questions, like during the fingerprinting especially. He was like, so do you leave fingerprints on everything? Do you leave nail marks when you drag somebody? And just, they were kid questions, but knowing the context, it's like, is he talking about James? But at the same time, I think any kid would be like, oh, how does that work?
Well, yeah. Well, kids are curious creatures, but
Mm-hmm.
I think part of it is, and we even see this with like adults sometimes, is when they're going through the processes, they start reliving the moment, and then they start panicking because
Mm-hmm.
of evidence that may be there from things that they did during their crime.
Yeah.
So they start asking questions to kind of see how screwed they are. I
Yeah.
don't think that necessarily a 10-year-old boy is going to be trying to gauge how screwed he is, but we do see adults do similar things.
Yeah. Well, and
Sometimes.
apparently he might have asked it again because they might have driven him kind of along the way that they had walked, and he might have asked it again in the car. But again, I only saw that in one place as well.
Right, right.
So they fingerprinted both boys, and they took blood, hair, and fingernail samples to compare with what was found on James' body and in the area.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna hate this part.
Mm.
38 witnesses attested to seeing James with the two boys on Friday, but they had not foreseen the outcome of letting them go on their way together. Some of the witnesses who had seen them had said that James appeared happy and laughing as the boys played with him and carried him while walking after leaving the shopping center. But some witnesses had seen James clearly upset, crying for his mother. Most of them had assumed that the older boys were his brothers who were just inexperienced at watching a toddler. Even when James had an injury on his forehead, which he got after being pushed down by one of the boys during their walk. So he had like a big bump and like a little bit of blood and stuff on his forehead.
If I saw that, I'd be like, "Where's your mother?" Like,
so here's the thing.
You obviously are not qualified to be watching your little brother. Like, where's your mom?
There's apparently one guy who overheard one of them saying like, "Oh, I'm never going to watch my little brother again." So they also were telling people that this was their little brother. They went into a candy store and they asked if they could buy candy for their little brother with James. They had him with them. They went into a pet shop with him, and they were like, they went to one of the tanks and were like yelling that one of the fish was dead, and then the employee was like, "Leave." But they went into like 2 shops with him.
And so that he was their little brother.
That's what they were saying. And then some boys who I think they went to school with John and Robert, but were a little bit older than them. They recognized them and they like stopped to talk to them. And they asked about James. And one of them's like, "Who is this kid?" And they were like, "Oh, it's John's little brother." So that now they're saying it's John's little brother because these 2 kids know them. They know they're not related. And then they were like, "Why is he crying?" And the boys said, "Oh, we're just going to take him home." So the classmates didn't really see a reason to worry if that was the case.
Right. But at that point, it's like, obviously they know, like, they shouldn't be walking around with this boy that they're not related to. Like,
yeah, but so these 2 know they shouldn't be walking around with the boy they're not related to, but their classmates didn't know that they weren't related because they didn't know John as well. So apparently they both knew Robert a little better and they didn't really know John. The crazy thing is Robert actually has a little brother with similar what's the word? Similar features? Like features. Yeah. Like he has like the same color eyes and hair and stuff as baby James did.
That's crazy.
Robert and John walked nearly 2 miles with James to get to the railroad, sometimes kicking him to make him follow along, because sometimes he would kind of follow them when they lured him, and other times he was kind of like, "I just want to go to my mom," so he was trying to not walk with them. So people said they like saw Robert kick him a little bit, they saw John like shake him a little bit. And also at one point when they were walking by the canal, they were like going to push him in, but they didn't, I guess. But they thought about it. Or like joked about it.
What?
Yeah. It's not good. But then he like didn't get close enough to the edge.
Well, yeah. I don't think
honestly that would have been a better way to go.
Yeah.
So that would have been less brutal. In one neighborhood along their walk, there was a woman with her daughter who had seen James already injured and was worried about him, despite him being with the other 2 boys. And the boys told her that he was the missing boy and they were taking him to the police station. And originally, She insisted on taking him there herself. She's like, oh, these kids are too young. I just want to make sure he gets there safely. Like, it's not that she thought they were going to do anything. It's just that she thought, well, I just want to make sure that they get there
these
okay.
3 kids, there's this kid missing. These 3 kids are walking to the police station alone with no adult. Like, obviously, an adult's going to be like, well, let me go with you.
And they're not far from the police station. But she has her own baby daughter with her. So she asks one of her nearby neighbors who's walking a dog right next to them. She's like, hey, could you take care of my daughter just for a few minutes while I take this kid to the police station? And the neighbor was like, no, my dog doesn't like kids. So
oh my goodness.
The other woman, whose hands were too full to help with her own kid, reluctantly let the boys go.
Ah.
When they got to the train tracks, I'm going to, real quick, just warning, this is where the brutality really starts.
Okay.
When they got to the train tracks, the boys splattered the blue paint, which was previously stolen from a shop, onto James' face, and it got in at least his left eye.
Oh.
They then battered him with bricks and stones from the area, kicked him, hit him, and they hit him with an iron bar that was in the area. They inserted shoplifted batteries into his mouth, and there are suspicions that they could have also used those to sexually assault him, but none of them were found, like, in there. And then lastly, they dropped a 22-pound railway fish plate on his head.
Oh.
So that probably weighs more than he did.
Yeah. That's so sick.
They don't know which injury was the fatal one. The boys then laid James over the train tracks and weighed his head down with rubble and bricks. And a forensic pathologist said that when John and Robert left him there, James would still have been alive, but that he passed away before the train came. So he wasn't alive when the train came, but he did lay there suffering after they left him for a while.
That's disgusting. That's so sad. I don't often feel like sick when I hear things like that, but with a kid that little, the fact that I'm like looking at him and I'm like, it's like, I
the
feel
way
a little
that he ran
nauseous.
off, like the reason he's running around as soon as his mom lets him go is because he just learned how to run.
Right.
Like when they just figure it out, it's an exciting new thing. So
right.
It's just like,
that's so sad. That is so sad.
And I'll send you a picture of baby James later on too. He was adorable.
He's so little. I can't believe.
He's so little.
Ugh.
And then, after they left there, they both went to a video store, which is where John's mother found them, and furiously dragged them out, stating she'd been looking for John, and she was beating them both as she took them out. And she lectured them that some maniac had taken a boy at the shopping center and could have taken them.
And she didn't know it was her own child. Oh my goodness.
And then Robert ran away from her and ran home in tears, where his mother, Anne, then reported Susan to the police for beating her son.
Which, I mean, like, okay, I get that, but also your son's a murderer.
Yeah, but once I tell you more about Robert's history, you'll see that it's kind of hypocritical of Anne there.
All right.
When questioned about the murder of baby James, both John and Robert took a while to open up, but they began blaming each other. For some backstory here, here's my backstory that I just mentioned. Robert Thompson was born on August 23rd, 1982, and he grew up in a home filled with physical abuse. His father had been physically abusive to his mother, who was in turn physically abusive to her children.
Right.
And that was before his dad just abandoned the family. After that, his mom turned to alcohol as her kind of coping mechanism, and she had 6 kids at the time, but more later.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so she just got left after being abused by her husband. Then she gets left alone with all these kids, and she just gets kind of overwhelmed.
I think anybody would get overwhelmed with all those children.
She did it a very bad way and turned to alcohol and kind of left them all to their own devices. So thanks to the only father figure they had ever had, the older boys started kind of ganging up on the younger kids. So much of his aggressive personality came from being defensive. after
Right.
years of beatings from his 5 older brothers, because he was the youngest at that time,
Oh my goodness.
until there were more babies, obviously, because now he has a younger brother.
Right.
The whole family kind of had a reputation. All of them would skip school often. And as Robert got a little bit older, then he would bring his younger brother along with him, because he had, I think, 2 younger brothers.
That's
And
a lot
then,
of kids.
yeah, there's a lot of kids, especially all boys.
Yeah. Oh
I don't
yeah.
remember, I didn't read about a sister ever. I read about a lot of brothers. And then John Venables was born on August 13th, 1982, so 10 days before Robert. And he was not abused by his parents or family members from anything that I read. Everybody said he had a, pretty average childhood, other than his parents did get divorced in his childhood, but they would sometimes get back together.
Which
And
is
they
still
did kind of
traumatic,
co-parent their 3 children. And John was the middle child. However, both of his siblings had developmental issues, which took up a lot of his parents' time and money because they had to go to like special schooling and things like that, which seemed to probably lead him to feeling pretty jealous and lonely.
Yeah.
So when he befriended Robert, the two began to skip school together and kind of bully the other students.
Not great, but
yeah.
I mean, kids learn by example mostly. So, and pack mentality is really strong, especially with kids. So they may do things they normally wouldn't do when they're in a group of friends.
Well, and one of the things, it was hard to say because some reports said that he had never been bullied before, and some said that he had been bullied because his siblings had developmental issues, and then people would say that he did too, even though he didn't, or something like that.
I mean, I can believe that kids would do that.
Yeah, I do too.
Kids can be cruel. Kids can be really mean.
So yeah, I think they both they'd been bullied by others and then turned to bullying themselves.
Which happens a lot.
Yeah. Cycle continues sort of thing. So
Yeah.
Next I'm going to kind of get into their interviews. It goes on for a while with both of them, a couple days. And we're going to start with Robert. And obviously they had trouble with interviewing these kids for murder because they're 10.
Right.
So it's like, how do you ask a 10-year-old if they committed a murder? How could they even be sure that these kids understood their rights or the weight of their crime?
Right.
So some sources say that Robert asked the police if they took James to the hospital to get him alive again. So it seemed like he didn't fully understand that not all injuries can be healed, and James was not going to be alive anymore.
Right.
They also, in the interview, they then asked Robert if he knew the difference between truth and lies, which he said he did. Unfortunately, that did not stop him from switching back and forth between them. He often would lie about petty things at home, like if he'd been at school. So he just kind of continued that here. He would get defensive when the police questioned his lies, saying things like, "I was there, you weren't," to them. It seemed like he mostly kept his composure, but he would cry whenever he was caught in a lie.
I see.
And then he eventually admitted to going to the Strand with John that day, but he attempted to make it sound like he was a witness rather than involved in the crime. So he was claiming to have seen James and his mother when he and John were at the escalators. But the shopping center had been bustling that day, because this is the 90s.
Right, and the mall is like
what
the
people
only
did.
thing. Yeah,
There
the
were
only thing
tons
to
of
do.
mothers with their babies there.
Yes.
And it included all the shopping they needed to do. So the police questioned why he would take notice of this specific mother and child in the middle of that crowd. But he was like, "No, I saw them. I don't know," sort of thing.
Right.
And he insisted that when he and John left the Strand, they just visited the library and went home. And then they asked Robert, "Is there a reason that John would lie about being at the Strand?" Because in the other interviewing room, they have somebody else speaking with John. And Robert said maybe John had done something bad and made a baby follow them, but that he lost them somewhere, or they lost him somewhere, and that Robert didn't really know because he hadn't looked behind him when it was happening. And John was behind him. He hadn't looked over his shoulder, is what he said. They questioned him about his jacket, because that was seen in the CCTV. And he said many of that jacket were sold. But then investigators asked about John's jacket, which was more distinctive, and it was in the same footage. And Robert was like, yeah, well, he's not walking along with me, because he had seen the photo of the CCTV and showing him walking slightly further than John and James.
Right.
The detective says, we believe that you left with baby James and John. Robert says, who says? The detective says, we say, now. And Robert says, no, I never left with him. The detective says, well, tell me what happened then. And Robert says, it shows in the paper that John held his hand. So Robert refused to outright say that he had witnessed what John had done, but he implicated John in the image. The contradiction was that he had claimed to be with John all day that day, and he was then cornered and kind of forced to admit more. He said they had walked around with James but let go of him at a nearby church. The police told him that he was going to be detained and not able to go home. So he said, why do I have to stay here? John's the one that took the baby. And then the next day, they continue the interview, and he opens up a little more. And he said that they left James by the railway after John had thrown paint in James' eye. But that he didn't know what happened after that. And then the officers asked if he had stolen the batteries that were found at the scene, and he turned bright red. But he denied it, despite his clear embarrassment. And Robert's mother, Anne, who was present the whole time since her son's a minor, she told him, just tell the truth, it'll be easier. And Robert said, John threw a brick in his face. His mom said, why? Robert said, I don't know. And the detective says, try to think. Let's see what we've got. We're getting there, aren't we? We're getting to the truth now. And Robert says, well, I'm going to end up getting all the blame because I've got blood on me.
Bro.
And then Robert began to describe how he claimed that John had committed the murder, talking about him throwing more bricks and hitting him with a big metal thing with holes in it, which would have been that railway fish plate.
I'm trying to figure out how a 10-year-old can lift something that heavy.
I know, that's part of why I think
they both had to have lifted that.
For sure.
They
Because
both
I don't think one of them could have lifted that, because personally, like, 22 pounds, it's not like that it's the heaviest thing, you know, like I've had a dog that weighed about that, but carrying her around for a bit as an adult was a lot. And for a 10-year-old.
Yeah, for a 10-year-old. 10-year-olds are not known to be, like, very strong.
Yeah.
I mean, they are, but to lift something like that up and then to throw it, that's not really something I can see a 10-year-old child doing.
And he also said that John was hitting him with a stick. I think that was probably the iron thing they found.
Probably.
And then he said that John threw one of the batteries at James' face. Robert claims he was trying to pull John away and stop him the entire time, but that he wouldn't quit. Robert said, I only pinched, as in he only shoplifted, because this is England.
Right.
The detective told Robert they thought he had taken part in the crimes committed against James, to which he said, well, that's what you think. He would get kind of bratty sometimes.
Well, yeah, you can tell.
His mom's next to him, and she's, like, horrified. She's in disbelief this whole time. So he starts directing his words towards her, seeing her get all freaked out. He's like, I tried to get him off. He just kept hitting him and hitting him and hitting him, but I couldn't do nothing about it. That's what he said. And then there was a memorial at the train tracks for James, which Robert had taken a rose to. And the investigators asked him why. He responded with, because then baby James knows I tried to help him up there, and I'm thinking of him now. So I don't know. It's like weird for a kid to think of it like that, you know? For him to like think of taking the rose there, that seems really weird. Like, I don't think a kid would think that far, but at the same time, he definitely was a part of this.
Oh, yeah. But the thing is,
it's a strange thing.
You said that John keeps blaming Robert, and then Robert's turning around and blaming John. Mm-hmm. Which is, again, that's something that we see a lot in adults, too, is, like, when couples tend to be in this situation, they'll immediately turn on each other.
Yeah.
To get the blame off of themselves.
Yeah. So, then all the things I read kind of skipped to the next day of the interviewing. Mm-hmm. And the next day, Robert said he had touched James, but only in an attempt to move him off of the track, which was his way of explaining the blood on his shoes. And he claimed that then, as he was lifting him, he put James back down because there was so much blood, and he didn't want his mother to be mad at him for getting blood stains on his clothing. I'm like, you don't think she'd be more mad about the murder of a toddler?
She's going to be mad either way. but, you know,
Mm-hmm.
murdering a toddler is worse than getting blood on your clothes.
But here's
You
where
know?
he brings up his little brother, who apparently had a very close resemblance to James. And he says, if I wanted to kill a baby, I'd kill my own, wouldn't I?
Things not to say when you're not being interviewed for murder.
Just kind of a crazy thing. Like, of course, that's one of the things that we have a direct quote on because it's so crazy, it's in everything.
Right.
And it's just like, I mean, when you think of how James bears a resemblance, it's almost like, well, were you taking out your anger on your little brother?
In a way.
But I don't know. Here's one thing I'll say. I know I'm not even through into John's. They never say why they actually did it.
They probably don't
saying
know
that
why
one
they
of
did
them
it.
came up with it. They're just like, he said to do it, but neither of them ever say why.
And I think,
So
you know,
we still don't know.
Kids do have a disconnect when it comes to the why of things sometimes. So maybe they genuinely just decided that that's what they were going to do. There was no why.
Yeah, I don't know. Towards the end of the interview, the investigators brought up that James had trauma to his genitals, and they believe what may have happened with the batteries. They brought that up as well. And Robert seemed more upset at those implications against him than anything else previously. They asked him who undressed James, and Robert began crying, and he said, I'm not a pervert, you know? And he refused to answer more questions. He just kept saying stuff about him not being a pervert. But then the officers persisted, and they were like, what do you think John's going to say if we ask him about this? And he said, John would say that he took off James's pants and played with his privates. And in John's interview, he was the opposite of Robert's, like, mostly composed answers. John was extremely distressed, crying pretty much the whole time. And he wasn't lying as much. There was still some lying going on, but he was more avoiding answering a lot of the questions. And he seemed really upset because his mom was present too, since he's, again, a minor. And I think his dad was there too, but he was more upset about his mom being there, I guess. I think he was really close with his mom. The investigators, like, they pulled his parents out at one point and asked them, they were like, we need you to reassure him and tell him that you will love him no matter what. And I'm like, oh my God, I get that's, like, what they need to, like, get him to talk, but I cannot imagine being a parent in that situation, how hard that is, because I feel like it's hard because you love your kid, and this is a 10-year-old, but at the same time, I don't know if I could forgive my kid for doing that, even if they're only 10. I don't think I could love them no matter what. So it would be like gritting my teeth saying that to them.
Yeah, it would be I think that's one of the hardest things, you know, knowing that your child, who is still a child, did something to a baby like that, and then having to sit there and pretend like everything's normal because your child is struggling to grasp their own action. A lot
closer with him, you know?
Yeah.
So, like, he was actually closer with his parents a lot more than Robert was, and it's just, which is part of why they need them to say that, to get him to talk, but it's just like, imagine finding out your kid did that.
Yeah, I guess it's because we're not parents, so we don't have that connection that a parent would have with a child. But I still, like, there are certain things where you have to draw a line, and that is definitely a line for me.
Yeah, same. That's one of the scary things, though, is even, I mean, there are things that they might have done wrong with their parenting that I might not agree with as a parent sort of aspect. Like, I would say I probably would want to make sure he feels like he's getting attention. But again, it's not like they were, like, doing anything wrong. It's just that they weren't necessarily there for him. You know? They weren't, like...
He was emotionally
it did say that she was beating him on the way out of the video store, so I don't know how often that happened.
And that is, you know, that is not good.
Yeah, and I definitely don't want to blame them, because they're kind of victims in this too, and they got really harassed, the parents did, after this.
Oh, yeah. Know? But here's the thing about that is, and we were talking about this a little bit yesterday, the family members of these people are not inherently responsible for those people's actions because they're individuals.
And I say, like, there are some that come from, like, how they're nurtured, and there are some that are just like that.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll get into that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of like nurture versus nature here. Like, you can be
Yeah.
raised any way and still turn out fine, or you can be raised perfectly fine and turn out to be
Mm-hmm.
a
Yeah,
problem.
and honestly, for the people who commit the crimes, like, there's no excuse because plenty of people go through abuse and go through all these things and turn out to be some of the kindest, most amazing people ever. So
Exactly.
the only reason that I feel bad in this situation is because you feel bad for the kid with most serial killers. You're like, oh, I feel bad for what happened to them when they were a kid, but not what they're doing as an adult. But these are still kids.
Exactly.
So that's like the point that's really getting driven home here. We keep talking about it, but it's just such a
They're
hard thing,
still
such a hard
kids.
pill to swallow.
Yeah, it
So
is. It really is.
so after his parents reassured him, he was a lot more talkative. And of course, he started off blaming Robert for any bad behavior on his part. He said that he only did bad things with Robert because he was too scared to do anything otherwise. And this was just in general, not even just about this. He was saying anytime he did anything bad with Robert, it was because he wouldn't have done it if he wasn't with Robert. But it was exciting to hang out with Robert because he did things that his good friends would never do.
You gotta pick a side. Either you like hanging out with Robert or you don't like hanging out with Robert. You have to pick a side.
Obviously, he liked it. They were like best friends.
Well, yeah, of course. But, like, don't sit there and be like, everything bad I ever did is all Robert's fault.
That's
Like, no,
basically what
you
they were
still
saying.
did it. You still did it, though. Like, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
little man, but you still did it.
And then, here's the thing. He says it was Robert's idea to skip school that day, and then they had gone to the park, the railways, and a cemetery where Robert tried to steal flowers, but John was like, no, don't do that. And that Robert had thrown paint at him, at John, to explain the paint on his jacket. And he didn't mention the shopping center at all. And then they pressed him about going to the Strand, informing him that Robert had already admitted they were there. So he immediately is like, Robert is a liar. And the detective says, you see, Robert says he was with you, and you guys were at the shopping center. And John's like, no, we weren't. The detective says, Robert says that you were. And John's like, well, yeah, we were, but we never saw any kids there. And then his mom starts getting mad. She's like, were you there? And John's like, yeah, but we never got a kid, Mom. We never got a kid. And the detective has to tell the mom, he's like, you got to calm down. We need you to not get angry with him. And he just keeps on repeating. John does. He's like, we never got a kid, Mom. We saw kids, but we never got a kid. You think we did, but we didn't, is what he was saying. And then this also, there's like a skip. I don't have anything between that and then the next day. They continued the interview the next day and told John more of what Robert had said, including that Robert told them that John had taken the baby. And he started screaming and crying. He was like, I haven't touched a boy. I never killed him. We just took him and left him at the canal, Mom. That's all. He was talking to his mom a lot. He was pointing all this at his mom the most of the time. And then he just kind of got more hysterical as they asked him how they got the baby, and he contradicted his statements a lot. And then his parents had to reassure him again because he was getting really hysterical. And then after they reassured him again, he climbed onto his mom's lap and he said, I did kill him. What about his mom? Will you tell her I'm sorry?
Oh my God. The fact that he did that in his mom's lap.
I know.
Like,
and then, like, you're thinking about this other mom who doesn't have a baby to climb in her lap anymore.
Right, exactly. And I'm sure that's exactly what his mom was thinking about. Like, you want to be in my lap, but you just took somebody else's baby away, and now you want me to tell her you're sorry?
And then after that, he kind of told a different side than Robert did, but he started going more into detail about their walk around the Strand and then with James after leaving. But in his story, Robert had done almost all of it. And he claimed it was Robert's idea to kill James and that he didn't want to go along with it. And he said, we took him to the railway and started throwing bricks at him. And they were like, who threw the bricks? And he said, Robert threw the bricks and the iron bar at him. And that he himself had only thrown teeny little stones and only at James' arms, never at his head.
Wow. How nice of you.
John claimed that Robert had been the one to throw the blue paint at James, and then when James cried, he threw a brick at him, and that he kept trying to pull Robert back, and Robert continued the assault and called James bad names, and that James kept, like, falling down when Robert would throw stuff at him, but that he kept getting back up, and then Robert would say, like, stay down, and throw more stuff at him.
Mm.
And then he said after Robert hit him with the bar, James fell onto the tracks and John and Robert ran away, is what he told them. Not that they put him on the tracks, but that he fell and they ran.
He fell there. Ugh.
Even though they put rubble on top of his head, which means they didn't run away.
Right, and they had to
and he
stay.
was deliberately put there.
Yeah.
John said he never wanted to hurt James and that he deliberately missed when throwing things and only threw light things. And he accused Robert of taking off James' pants and underwear, but then he said that he helped remove James' shoes, and he wouldn't explain why he would help with that. And then John admitted that he had kicked and punched James, but he claimed he only did both light.
That doesn't matter, you still did it.
He said that Robert kicked James in the genitals around 10 times.
Oh,
and
no.
When the detectives brought up the batteries, John became really distressed again and said he didn't know anything about what Robert did with them, and he was afraid they would blame it on him. And in response to being asked if he did anything to James' genitals, he got very upset, and he started hitting his father, who was next to him.
That's,
I know,
display of some... So, exactly. I was going to say, because he's talking about how, like, Robert was the one being mostly violent. It was all Robert. He was light,
and he starts punching his dad in the middle of the interview room.
His dad. And again, adults do that too. Sometimes with like men for domestic violence cases, they will purposefully have like a female like jury, a female prosecutor, just to see how he will react. Yeah. And 9 times out of 10, they get an attitude with the women and not with the men. So it's little tells like that that really help investigators sort of piece motives and like behaviors and such together. And that was probably brought up in court.
Oh, yeah. And then they had all they needed, really, from both of their things at that point, because he had already said he killed James. They were a little confused because he said, I killed him, not we killed him. So, but they were able to use it for both of them still. And they had plenty to charge them, and they were both indicted with the abduction and murder of James Patrick Bulger. There were a few things that said that they might have tried to abduct another kid before that, so they might have also got attempted kidnapping or, like, attempted abduction on there. But that kid's mom had, like, walked over, and they left him.
Well.
So their trial was in November of 1993, or that's when it started, and they were detained until that time. And for a while, they were referred to as Child A and Child B publicly, because due to their age...
Yeah, you can't.
They were 10-year-olds. They couldn't do that. And then they did eventually name them when they were like formally named the suspects and went to trial. And John was deemed fit to stand trial after Dr. Susan Bailey examined him, and she stated she believed he had no organic disabilities or brain damage, which would cause his behavioral problems, and that he wasn't suffering from any severe mental illnesses like depression or hallucinations. And he understood the permanence of death and said that death meant people could not come back. So he understood what they had done, really.
Right.
Because he knew that when you kill someone, they don't come back because death means they're gone.
Right.
And they said he even kind of had an understanding of the concept of, like, heaven and hell.
Okay, so, yeah, he fully, like, knew there's a point of no return when it comes to human life.
And then for Robert, psychiatrist Eileen Vizard was able to report that Robert was above average intelligence, and he did not display any symptoms of mental illnesses, deeming him also fit to stand trial after spending time evaluating him as he retold the story of what happened to James with dolls that represented them as visual support. Which
interesting.
And then it actually said at one point while she was doing that, Robert said something like he just wished he had stopped John and that he had just kicked him so that he would stop. And she was like, do it. So he took the dolls and like made the Robert doll kick the John doll.
Which
I
I
thought
guess,
was a little silly.
I mean, yes, but in
It
terms
doesn't
of
fix the
psychology,
situation, but
it doesn't
yeah.
fix the situation, but in terms of psychology, things like that do, I guess, I don't know, help? I don't know.
Hmm. And then,
Psychology does be silly
yeah,
sometimes.
one of the things I didn't really include it much in here because I didn't see it in really many of the articles that I looked at, but it was also mentioned in another thing that I listened to. And it's that John might have had like worries about being haunted, and so it might have been Robert and John. And I don't remember which one of them they said, but one of them like had these crazy things like convincing them they were pregnant with baby James and stuff, and it was really weird.
Does happen.
I don't
I've,
remember which kid they said it was for because I couldn't really find it in the articles I was reading, but it was like in one of the things I listened to.
and in a way, they are being haunted if they're having like
Mm-hmm.
dreams, nightmares, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, they are being haunted, and honestly, I think that's part of the punishment is the psychological ramifications of doing that to
Mm-hmm.
somebody.
That is what a lot of people said, actually, was like they both were kind of up until after the trial, they were like kind of trying to blame each other, and it might not have sunk in for a bit yet, but after that, it seemed like for a very long time they were dealing with the heaviness of what they had done, especially probably as they got older and actually understood it better. Um, and they both tried to plead not guilty because they were blaming each other.
Right.
And then the prosecution obviously believed they both took part, and they had to prove that both boys knew that their actions were wrong. The jury was shown many of the images of James' injuries, and they were visibly moved by them, is what people said. And the trial went on for a couple weeks, but after many witness statements and a statement by Denise Bulger being read out, and assessments from forensic scientists of James' injuries, the two now 11-year-olds were found guilty. Due to their age, the punishment of their actions was very different than a regular guilty verdict would be in this sort of case. And
Right.
they were to be at a facility until they were at least 18. So they said until they matured, and then until they had been deemed rehabilitated as well. Sorry. And then they were, but in June of 2001, so 18, they were both ruled to no longer be a threat to public safety by the parole board. And a few weeks later, they were both released. They were also both given new identities because of the severeness of,
Their
how
crime.
people reacted and stuff.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of people who were really angry about James' death, of course, and still are. And
Well, yeah.
they wanted to like seek out their own justice when the boys were out, but they don't know their identities, so they can't.
And that's why they did that.
Mm-hmm. And then they both are still supposed to be reporting to probation officers, and they have strict rules to follow. And while Robert has not had any more issues that we know of, over the years since his initial release, John has been found to have child pornography on his computer a lot of times. And he
Oh.
began using illegal drugs, including cocaine.
And this is where I stopped feeling bad for John.
Yeah. In 2011, he was arrested for child pornography, and he was allowed to be given another new identity because there was some sort of security breach. So his other one was like leaked, I guess. Also, he told some of his close friends his real identity, apparently, too.
Which you're not supposed to
Which is
do if you're
also,
given a new identity.
Why would you
Why would you
want to?
want
Why would you want to be like, actually, I'm the person that
that?
murdered that little boy 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Like, why would you want to be known for that unless you are literally just a sick and twisted person?
And I think he, like,
So,
at this
I
point,
feel
I
bad
think
for
he
the kid
is.
version a little bit, but honestly, I don't feel bad for his kid version as much as I feel bad for Robert's kid version. And I really don't
Exactly.
feel bad for him as an adult at all.
No. No,
Because
I
Robert
don't
was
either.
rehabilitated. There is no new news on Robert. I don't know his new name. I don't know anything about it. But I would know if he was getting in trouble because we know that John's been getting into trouble.
And here's the thing now is I'm more willing to believe that John was the main aggressor,
Me
like
too.
Robert's version of the story, just because of what John is doing as an adult.
Yeah, I definitely think they both took part. Especially, like, with Robert getting just as flustered with the batteries thing.
Yeah.
You know, like, they definitely both were a part of this. And then the 22-pound plate, and they were both kids.
Yeah, it was a group effort. It was a group effort, but
I am more likely to believe, and we're never going to know for sure, right? But
right.
I'm more likely to believe right now that it was John being the ringleader. And most people thought it was going to be Robert
because Robert was
the one who was, like, more aggressive at first, and then he was a little bit manipulative because he would only cry when he got caught lying and stuff.
Right.
And he was like, completely stoic other than that. So they were like, oh, he's manipulative. He's the ringleader and stuff. But he's not looking at child porn as an adult.
Exactly.
And 2011 was not the only time. So in 2013, John got released, only to be found with more child pornography in 2017. So in 2018, he was charged to more prison time.
John.
In 2020, he was denied parole. And again, in September of 2023, he was denied parole due to concerns for public safety. James Bulger's father and mother are no longer together.
But
they both have still been activists and this kind of stuff. James Bulger was a huge case that, I mean, it's rocked that place forever. And there are still, like, when I was looking at it, there are still, like, news stations constantly talking about it, interviewing his dad. And his dad has been trying to get them to release John's name and his new identity. And
I think
they're refusing because they're like, oh, but it will result in somebody getting killed if we do that. And it's like,
what about my kid?
Like, just
what
stop
about
letting
my kid?
him out into the world. Like, if you're gonna let him out into the world, you need to release his name so people know who to stay away from, or you can just keep him in prison. Because quite frankly, his crimes are bad enough. You know that he's old enough to know better now, and he's looking at child porn after he committed a crime against a child that may have been sexually motivated. And he did that forever ago and was in prison for it. Well, not prison even. One of the things I heard was that it was more like a resort almost, the thing that they stayed in.
Like a rehabilitation center.
Yeah.
It's like, I can understand that. I would rather a child be sent to, like, a rehab or something like
juvie. And it's not to, and, like, everybody's a different person as an adult than they were at 10, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I completely understand, like, the rehabilitation part of it because it worked for,
it worked for Robert.
It worked for Robert. So
we're rooting for Robert unless something comes out that he did do something, and then I will no longer be rooting for Robert.
Obviously. Right now, I'm not rooting for him. I still think that if I was his mom, I don't think I could forgive that. I would.
Oh no, absolutely not.
But I don't know. I don't know how his family feels. They probably. I mean, I bet they're really private now, all of them.
Oh yeah,
I heard one thing that said he might have, like, a family now. So.
Well, I mean,
like a wife.
If that's true.
So.
I mean, good for him. John, though, we need to keep John locked up. We need to put John on several lists.
Well, and that's one of the other things that even before finding out that he's, like, done all this stuff as an adult that kind of makes you think he could be the person who kind of decided to kill James is more that he knew what death was.
Yeah.
So he's like, oh, let's kill him. And then he's saying, like, that he probably also was telling Robert, like, they'll just take him to the hospital when we're done. Because that was Robert's first thought, was like, are you going to take him to the hospital and make him alive again?
So Robert, like, really just did not understand the
really get it
of death. Like, he didn't understand.
And he does lie about a lot of things, so that could have been a lie. But it does sound like something a kid would say.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
So, I don't know. This case is just absolutely heartbreaking to me.
Yeah,
and
it is.
I'm glad that, at the very least, John is in prison for the foreseeable future. And hopefully, at this point, hopefully he doesn't get out because he clearly has not been rehabilitated if he's looking at that stuff. It's just gross.
And I do think that his name should be released at this point just because he has had multiple offenses regarding children.
Yeah, even as an adult, he has had multiple offenses.
Yes.
And if you think about that and then you think about, like, that's like just ignoring what he did as a 10-year-old. But then you think about, like, all of it together. It's like, so he constantly is looking at child porn And also, he killed a kid and potentially did sexually assault that child.
And that's why I think if they are ever going to release him, they need to make his name
They
public
better
and
not
not
release
change it
him,
again.
quite frankly.
But if they do, I don't think they will.
I
But
think at
if
the very
they
least
do,
they should tell James Bulger's father.
yeah.
Like, and they won't even allow him at the hearings because of the identity stuff. And that's just like this person murdered his baby.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I can't even begin to process that.
And he's still offending against children.
And he's still offending against children. It's disgusting, and it's
lock him up, throw away the key. Throw away the key.
This case is like one of, like, I've heard a lot of pretty terrible cases in my time, like listening to true crime and looking at the stuff, but just because it just hits so much differently. For one, because of how young the kid is. Normally you hear about a little older of kids, but then also because it was committed by other kids.
Yeah,
it's just insane.
Anytime it has like anything to do with kids, it's just such a difficult difficult topic, because kids are like innocent to an extent, and for kids to be able to like do something that twisted and sick, it's like hard to wrap your head around, like how or why they would, how would you think to do something like that as a kid, you know?
Mm-hmm. I mean, like, when I was 10, I was playing on Club Penguin.
Me too.
And like Moshi Monsters or whatever, you know? And I mean, they didn't have that, but they had other things that every other kid was doing. Go
to the park, you know? I mean, they said they were by the railroads, like going to the candy store.
Things while they had him. They went to the candy store. They went to the pet shop. They went to the video store. They did all these normal kid things while doing the terrible thing.
Which is so
crazy to me.
Wild to me.
I just like, I first heard about this case like last week or something, and it's been on my mind pretty much constantly since, because of how it is, the whole situation.
It's hard. It's a hard case.
And I don't know. I would probably feel, I bet I'd feel even stronger if I had like a human child.
Oh yeah, me too. 100%.
But as someone who only has animal children, I would forgive Blair. I would forgive my cat if she did something, but she would only do something if she had a really good reason.
Soybean is a known dismemberer of baby mice. So, and I did forgive him for that, but I don't think I could forgive my human child for doing something like that. Oh
my god, I couldn't forgive a human child for dismembering a mouse.
No,
I'm like, no, you're about to grow up to be a serial killer if you're dismembering animals.
If I see my child doing that,
it's like, that's normal because it's a cat.
That's what a cat does. You know, cats are natural predators. Children are not supposed to be predatory at all. And I'm looking at this picture, and I'm going back to the case.
I should show you baby James.
You should, but the reason that I'm thinking that it was more John, not just because
the way he looks, I don't know. He's got like a look on his face, whereas Robert looks like kind of scared. John looks like, I think I just got caught.
Yeah, but he looks like he got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. But I'm looking at the CCTV footage. Robert is completely distanced, like he doesn't want anything to do with this. But John is holding his hand. Oh my god, that's a baby.
And then here's him smiling.
Is that ice cream? Oh. He's just a little guy.
I think that's like an enhanced photo, because
it looks enhanced.
It looks crazy.
It's enhanced, definitely, but it's.
James Bulger does have siblings. I don't remember if they're older. I know that he has at least one younger, because his mom was actually pregnant during the trial, so she wasn't physically there until the very last day when they were getting their verdict.
And you said that she actually did lose a baby before.
She did during pregnancy.
This.
So like a miscarriage, I think.
Yeah, so she had a miscarriage, and then this happens, and then she's pregnant again. That's like this could have caused another. It's there's just so much trauma. Oh
my god, somebody enhanced that picture of them walking. That's crazy.
It did?
Oh, wait. It might not be an enhancement. This might be. Oh, I heard there was like some film made with the basis being like a kid lured away to his death. And
Oh,
the family got really upset that they based it on James specifically.
I mean, yeah, I would be too if
Although
that
this
happened.
might just be an enhanced photo. I can't tell.
I just keep looking back to that CCTV where you can see like Robert's body language. Like it looks
Yeah,
like
I
he
mean,
genuinely doesn't want to
this
be a part of
might
this.
be an enhanced photo or it might be from that thing. I can't tell. But I'm searching
No,
that real quick.
that's not enhanced.
Yeah, but then
That's
I saw this
definitely
other
from
one
the
that was
kid.
like a picture of it as CCTV, so it looked more. I don't
Right.
know. But that was, I mean, just.
Ugh.
And it only took them a couple minutes to get him out of there.
Yeah.
It's
See,
just
this is,
crazy.
but yeah, it is crazy, and this is why my mom was on a child leash when she
Yeah.
was a child because my mom would run off, and my grandma already had another kid, and you know, sometimes kids don't know better, so you know,
Well, yeah.
this I
Obviously, I mean,
support
that's
child
what kids
leashes.
do. They run, you know?
They do, and they
And he
should
would
be
get,
able
he
to.
did have like a stroller, they said, but he would get all antsy and stuff.
A lot
So
of
she
kids
didn't always
do.
make him stay in the stroller.
Yeah, and a lot of kids get antsy like that. They get, you know, overstimulated because they're stuck and they want to move and they can't move because they're stuck in the stroller. So they should be like kids should not have to be scared of running around.
Yeah. And
But
I mean, I wouldn't want my kid to go running off in a store, but I can't blame the mother at all that she
no.
let go of his hand for a
Oh
second
no.
because it was like the one moment that she wasn't holding him.
Exactly.
There was
And
like one other moment during that day that she wasn't holding him, and she freaked out that time and found him immediately.
kids can be slippery. I have babysat many of my cousins. Kids are slippery little creatures
Yeah, and
and
it was just while she was paying. And then
yeah,
she lets go of him, gets her thing out of her purse, pays for their stuff, turns around, he's gone within like just like
a
30,
few
40,
minutes.
whatever, like a couple minutes. 30 seconds, a minute, I don't know how long exactly, but within like a minute or two, she comes running out the doors. He's already almost out of the building at that point.
And it's just crazy how fast something like that can happen. And I really
And she
do
did
feel
everything
for
right. She
her.
immediately was looking for him. She immediately
Yeah.
told security,
And
you know,
again,
and his
good,
name was over the loudspeakers and everybody's looking for him. And it's just like, he was
and
gone
again,
that quick.
good on the police for actually like taking this seriously
I think
because in
that's,
a lot of
yeah.
cases when it with little boys specifically, they're like, oh well, little boys they run off. They're on a rebellion streak.
Yeah.
They'll come
Well,
home.
yeah, I would say if he was under the age, or if he was over the age of like 9, they might have said that. But I think
Right.
with how little he was, it's like, obviously, like, he's not running away from home. He might have been running around, but he wasn't trying to actually run away from his mom.
Right.
And if he did, it was because somebody was luring him, which is what happened. Because he,
Yeah.
like, he walks out, right? He, like, walks out of the shop that they're in, and he just, you know, starts going, and then these kids started luring him away. And then you can see them kind of, I think if you watch the CCTV footage, like, actually watch it as a video, I think they mentioned there's, like, footage of them kind of luring him, and that last one that I sent you is the footage of them with John holding his hand.
Mm.
So it's just like,
It's so hard for me to wrap my head around like two kids actually doing that to a baby. It's
and
just
it's not like they
really
just did anything to him. It was like brutal.
yeah.
Like the extent of what they did to him.
Yeah, it's I
But it happened and it's real life and that's like,
that's the scary part
oh
is
my God.
it's it's just so heart-wrenching and
And I mean,
it's a bit nauseating the details
yeah.
the fact that some children can come up with something just so
So,
horrid and gruesome
and like in what, 2 months, baby James would be turning 34 if he was alive.
oh my God, that's crazy to think
So,
about.
and I mean, that means last year his mom experienced the 30th anniversary of her son's death.
Oh, and that's just
And what
that
should have been his 33rd birthday.
right. Oh,
So, and he didn't even make it to 3. I mean, 1 month after this happened, she had to experience his birthday without him.
And every year she has to experience.
Every year she experiences it without him. She made a Facebook post last year about it, I saw. And it's just so sad. And
it is. It's
so many people.
sad.
It's still one of the like worst crimes that has happened there. So many people have been, I mean, they were there for the trial. There were so many people who were like involved. There were so many people who have been posting on that Facebook thing, who have been responding to her posts and stuff, just being like, you know, it's 30 years later. It's 30 years means nothing to that mother.
Oh,
It
yeah.
does not diminish that pain.
No, it probably feels the same as it did, 30 years ago.
I just can't even imagine the pain that
Neither can I.
they have gone through. I mean, both of his parents, but especially his mom, who was overprotective of him.
Right. And had already lost a pregnancy prior to that. It's just so much, it's just such a traumatic and painful experience that words cannot possibly be
there are
described.
no words.
There are no words. And this is just a horrible, horrible case all around, because it's all kids. It's all kids. And that's just terrible.
I feel like we're probably going to be talking about this for like a while, even after we're done here.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a topic of conversation.
Yes, it is.
But with that being said, I do need to go.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I have to go get my man from work.
All right.
So, thank you to anybody who listens to this. Thanks, Maddie, Jay, and Carson for listening.
Because we know you will be.
Because we know that you are going to listen. And if you don't respond to us saying thanks, then I'll know you didn't actually listen.
Exactly.
So I will be calling you out in the chat, my friends.
I will be calling you.
And if anybody who isn't them listens, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to us ramble about true crime.
We're going to do this again, and next time it's your turn.
Yeah, I still haven't decided who I'm going to do yet, but we'll see.
Slay. All right. Bye,
All right.
bestie.
Bye, bestie. See you next week.
See you next week.